He got lost and was captured by an Apache woman tribe. Now, their queen demands an heir. Ethan had been following the broken trail only because it was the last familiar sign he had seen in hours. The land around him looked endless, identical in every direction, and he realized too late that he had wandered far from anything he could navigate back to. His horse's sudden panic and escape left him stranded with nothing but a canteen and the faint hope that he would eventually find someone, anyone, who could guide him back. But before he had the chance to consider his next step, a soft rustle behind him made him turn. Something moved too quickly for him to react, and the force that hit him was strong enough to knock the air from his lungs. Rough hands seized his arms, binding them behind him, while unfamiliar voices murmured in stern tones he couldn't understand. A cloth was tied around his eyes, and he felt himself being dragged, unable to fight or know where he was being taken. When the blindfold came off, Ethan found himself surrounded by armed women who studied him with a mixture of caution and dominance. Their clothing marked them clearly as Apache, but not like any group he had encountered before. These warriors carried themselves with an intensity that suggested deep loyalty to someone far more formidable. Ethan realized who that someone was the moment a particular presence approached, quiet at first, then unmistakably commanding. The queen stepped before him, adorned in ceremonial attire that made the ground seem to shift beneath her authority. Her gaze pierced through him as she circled slowly, inspecting him like one would examine a captured animal to determine its use. Ethan attempted to speak, explaining that he was lost and meant no harm, but the queen silenced him with a firm lift of her hand. She tilted his face upward with a touch that revealed neither kindness nor cruelty, just control. "You crossed into our domain," she said with calm conviction. "Our laws demand judgment." Her tone held absolute certainty, yet something in her eyes showed depth beyond rigid tradition. She didn't look at him as a threat. She looked at him as though fate had presented something unexpected. The warriors waited for her verdict. Ethan braced himself for punishment, but the queen's decision stunned everyone, including him. She declared that her tribe required an heir, one strong enough to carry the legacy forward, and she believed fate had delivered Ethan at the exact moment the tribe needed him. Murmurs rippled through the gathered women, their shock evident. Ethan's mind spun in confusion, unable to comprehend how losing his way had led to being named a potential father of a bloodline he barely understood. The queen explained that many seasons had passed without the tribe, securing a future leader, conflict with outsiders, dwindling numbers, and old wounds had weakened their lineage. She believed he possessed something their spirits had remained silent about for too long, a spark, a resilience. Ethan attempted to protest, insisting he wasn't part of their world, but she met his arguments with unshakable resolve. "You arrived here because destiny carried you," she said. "You will stand where destiny places you." He was taken to a separate shelter for the night. Though he expected mistreatment, he wasn't beaten or starved. Instead, he was guarded and left alone with the unsettling mixture of fear and curiosity that hung around him like a whisper he couldn't escape. Every attempt to loosen the ropes around his wrists ended in frustration, and the sting of the fibers only deepened his sense of helplessness. But when the queen entered the shelter, everything shifted again. She dismissed the guards and approached with the same steady confidence, but a softer gaze. She explained the truth behind her decision, not from the throne of authority, but from the heart of someone fighting for the survival of her people. The tribe was shrinking faster than she could protect it. They had lost warriors, mothers, children, and hope. Her role demanded a solution, not simply tradition. Ethan's arrival felt to her like an answer she couldn't ignore. She removed the rope binding him, watching him carefully as he rubbed the soreness from his wrists. Ethan asked why she believed he was capable of such responsibility. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him, searching for a sign. Finally, she spoke softly. "Because you didn't break under fear. Because you faced me with truth." Her certainty disarmed him more than her warriors had. She stepped back, giving him space rather than confinement, as though she was offering a choice she already knew he would contemplate long after she left. When she exited, Ethan sat alone in the flickering shadows, questioning everything that had led to this point. He had walked into their land by accident, yet now he felt something deeper binding him than rope ever could. The queen's words lingered in his mind, echoing with a weight that made it impossible to sleep. He realized that somehow, without intending to, he had stepped into a story much bigger than himself, one he was no longer sure he wanted to escape. Ethan was awakened early and escorted into the center of the camp, where every member of the tribe gathered. The queen stood waiting, her posture precise, her expression unreadable. The warriors parted as he approached, and though he was no longer tied, he felt the invisible pressure of every gaze measuring his presence. The queen announced that he would undergo the rites required of anyone chosen to influence their tribe's future, not as a prisoner, but as someone they needed to test with purpose. He followed the warriors to a sacred space marked by stones etched with ancient symbols. The queen carried a bowl filled with ash and crushed herbs, dipping her fingers into the mixture before painting symbols across his arms and chest. Each stroke was meaningful, representing traits she expected from someone who could stand at her side: responsibility, inner strength, and loyalty. Ethan held still, feeling the weight of her expectations settle through him. The first test required him to hold a ceremonial staff carved from the oldest tree in their territory. It was heavier than it appeared, and the moment he lifted it, pain shot through his shoulders. But he kept his stance firm, refusing to let it drop. The tribe watched, waiting to see whether he would falter. The queen observed him with unwavering focus, her gaze studying not just his strength but the will behind it. Minutes crawled by, yet Ethan pushed through until the queen finally nodded, signaling that he had proven enough. The second test brought him before the elders, who formed a tight circle around him. Each one asked questions meant to pierce through any deception. They asked what he feared, who he was beyond the surface, and whether he would abandon their queen if hardship struck. Ethan answered honestly, admitting his confusion, his fear of failing, and his uncertainty about fitting into their world. But he also spoke of his refusal to betray someone who had spared his life when she had every reason not to. The elders shared a silent glance before stepping aside, accepting his answers. For the final test, the queen personally led him away from the camp, stopping at the edge of a high overlook. She told him the truth she never shared publicly: how the tribe's survival weighed heavier on her than any crown, how their numbers were dwindling, how every day felt like a battle she was fighting alone. She said she didn't want obedience, she wanted truth. "Will you stand with us because you choose to?" she asked. "Or will you run when fear returns?" Her voice was steady, but he could hear the vulnerability beneath it. Ethan looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not just as a queen, but as someone carrying the weight of centuries. He realized he didn't want to run, not from her, not from the tribe, and not from what fate had placed before him. He told her he would stay, not because she commanded it, but because he chose it. When they returned, the tribe sensed everything had changed. The queen announced that the rites were completed, and that their ancestors had witnessed his resolve. Ethan stood beside her as she tied a beaded band around his wrist, marking him as someone connected to their future. The tribe bowed their heads in acknowledgement, their acceptance subtle but powerful. That night, the queen approached him again. Her expression carried something deeper than authority, something human, honest. She told him that the path ahead would be difficult, but it would be theirs to face together. Ethan felt a quiet certainty settle through him. He had come as a lost stranger, captured and confused. But now he stood as someone chosen, not by force but by destiny. And for the first time since he'd lost the trail, Ethan felt he had finally found a place where he belonged.